Right. Then let's go live. Just want to make sure everything's running, and then we'll kick off. Right, okay. I think we are live. Okay, let's start. So, hello and welcome to the Bible School Show, where we are just hoping for this hour on Sunday to go deeper into this Christian faith that we're a part of. As a church, to discover more about Jesus, more about this God that we love and worship. So, just to begin though, I'll begin with the reading first. So just to begin, I want to just read those first few verses of Isaiah 53 to give us a hint about what it is that we're looking to. Isaiah 53 verses 1 to 6. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. And then verse 6, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. And I just want to focus on that. Verse 1, who has believed our message? As we come here today, we're trying to say the same thing that the Bible has been saying. Verse 1, who has believed our message? What is that message that Isaiah is desperate to talk about? It's Jesus. It's how Jesus has saved us. That is Isaiah's message. That's what he's trying to say. So here today at this Bible School Show, we just want to go into that. We want to say the same thing that the Bible is saying. We want to talk about Jesus. So we're going to do that just by three little sections. Theology, where we're hoping to train our minds and hearts to follow in this way of life, this way of Christ. We want to have a little section on church history, where we're looking at examples of when Christians and the church down through history followed Christ with all their heart. And then finally, a bit of Bible study. How better to know Jesus, the Word of God, by looking at the very words of God. Bible study. Reading about Jesus. So let's start this Bible School Show with our first theology section. Let's have a look at that.
Hey. So, spiritual experiences can't replace Jesus. That's our theme for today in this first of our studies. And the reason that is, what's going on with that statement is, we've thought in the past that modern people sometimes reject religion out of rationalism. Quite often I meet people who say, oh, I'm not religious, I believe in reason, or I believe in science. So in their minds, the world is, the physical world, or particularly the physical things, everything is can be explained and understood using, in their minds, they think reason, science does that, and there is nothing else. So religion, in their mind, is kind of just this superstitious, irrational thing, and it's not for them. So you meet people like that. We've thought about them previously. But there's many, many people, increasing numbers, really, because I don't actually that often meet that science kind of reason thing as much. Particularly in this part of London, I meet more people who'll say, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. So they don't think, in their mind, it's not the religion is to be rejected, and they're not embracing, say, rationalism. What they are embracing is spiritualism. So lots of people I talk to say, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. Now, what's that about? Why do they say that? It really goes back to the beginning of the 19th century and things like that. It's a kind of a Western thing, really like that. But what it is there was this belief that reason and science has explained the physical world, so that religion, God, all that sort of stuff, got put into the realm of, say, inner things, emotional things, creative thing, imagination. So it's like there's a rich inside, the outside world, they like, that's for reason, science. And then there's an inside world. This is what was believed from the early 19th century onwards, particularly in Europe, but then in America too. There's an inside world for God and religion, and what now people say spiritual. So I even meet people who say, I'm an atheist, but I am a spiritual person. Like, that would be incomprehensible in the past, but what they mean is something like, I like art, I like music. Sometimes I met someone who said, I like gardening, therefore I'm a spiritual person. Or poetry or something. So it's usually things that they make them feel peaceful, creative, emotional, something that's really to do with their inner life generally. And often they go with like art, music, poetry, sometimes gardening, painting, things like that. And they'll say, therefore, I'm a spiritual person. Because the word spiritual is taken to mean that sort of thing. Feelings, emotional stuff, creative stuff. Sometimes it's getting in touch with nature, which is, again, like, what do you mean by that? I don't think people mean very much by it, but it's that idea. So how is it possible then? What do we make of all that in relation to Jesus? Can a person be spiritually alive and healthy, but not connected to Jesus? Not really, because being spiritual in the Bible, and actually throughout history around the world, being spiritual was much more serious than just saying, I like music, I like painting. Being spiritual was meant, I'm connected in some way to spiritual realities. And spiritual in that sense is meant to being truly alive and connected to the heavens and things like that. Now, if we could say, I can connect to the heavens to God by listening to classical music, doing a bit of gardening, enjoy a bit of poetry, well, that's, if you put it starkly, it's just laughable, isn't it? It's laughable, as if God's like, well, I was really unhappy with the world, but some people dug out some nice music, and now I'm like, yeah, well, that's fine. Everything's good now. Like, obviously, if you put it like that, it's obviously silly. But it needs to be sort of stated. And this idea that people, see, actually, the Bible would say, human beings can be spiritual, like into things spiritual, that is, have spiritual experiences. They can do that, but it's not necessarily a good thing. There are a lot of spiritual energies and beings out there, and you can have experience, sometimes through drugs, sometimes through psychological states. By opening yourself up to spiritual things, you can have intense spiritual experiences. But it doesn't mean that you're connected to the living God. It doesn't mean it's a healthy thing. It doesn't mean you're alive in the Bible sense. I'll give you an example. In the Bible, Paul wrote a letter to this church at Ephesus. Now, in Ephesus, if we read the book of Acts, there was this massive temple there that was considered to be one of the great wonders of the entire ancient world. And it was a temple to the goddess Artemis. Now, Artemis was the goddess of the hunt, wildness, and the moon. And to worship her was to sort of get in touch with nature, let your wild kind of thing. And in this temple, it said that there was something that was like a meteorite in the inner sanctum of the temple of Artemis. And ancient people said that if you dedicated yourself to the worship of this goddess Artemis, you could go through these spiritual disciplines and eventually be allowed into the inner sanctum where there was some sort of rock that came from the heavens. And ancient people said you had an intense, overwhelming spiritual experience of Artemis if you did it, right? So let's assume that's real, that yes, people in Ephesus would go and have spiritual experiences of some being called Artemis, and that it was like powerful, and they felt connected to the stars or something. Let's say all that. What does the Bible say to them? Does it say, that's pretty impressive, you've already got quite a long way to God, it'd be nice for Jesus just to finish you off with the last little bit? No. That isn't the Bible's view of what was going on at Ephesus at all. This is what Paul writes to them. He says, you, Ephesians, were dead, spiritually dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live. This is how it was when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. So he's like saying, oh, you did have spiritual experience. Yeah, but that was the devil. That the spirit that you were encountering was not leading you to the living God and giving you life. This spirit that you were experiencing is this spirit of disobedience that was draining you of life and killed you spiritually. So you had these things, but it wasn't good. It wasn't safe. It was killing you. And rather only this Jesus, who is the living God, he can lead you to safe spiritual, deep, enriching spiritual experiences. That's a massive thing. So spirit, when people say, I want to be spiritual, I'm into New Age spirituality, what they're often saying is, it's good to open yourself up to spirits, and maybe a spirit will be your guide. And have you got an animal spirit and all this kind of thing? The Bible's like, yeah, that can happen. There are spirits who will come and give you experiences and guide you in life, but they are bad. You shouldn't do that. The living God is offering to guide you. The eternal Holy Spirit will fill you. Forget these dangerous, dark and fallen, dangerous spirits. Have the Spirit of the living God who will fill you with light and life. So that's modern spirituality. People say, I'm spiritual. Often they don't mean very much by that, but let's take it that they want to be connected to spiritual things. The Bible's like, be careful. You can have spiritual experiences, but are they truthful? Are they life-giving? Are they really helping you to ascend into the highest heaven? Or are they actually killing you and actually constantly telling us, don't mess with these things. Trust yourself only to this living God, who himself, he is the highest of all things, and he himself will take you and bring you into him and sit with him in the highest place. So ascension, spiritual ascension, people often talk about that. It is possible, but only with the ascended Lord Jesus, the roots actually are going downwards, not upwards. Well, that's our thought for our first little thing. And now, PJ's arrived. I thought I was going to have to tell you about Thomas. Yeah? Is that right?
One first?
Yeah, there's Thomas and Jude.
There's Thomas and Jude. Which one do you want to do first?
Slide either one.
Is it the next slide? Yeah, it's Thomas is the next one, actually. Yeah, Thomas.
Okay.
Should I bang there?
Yeah.
Ready to do it? All right, so Thomas, you'll know that the Bible is a nickname because it means the twin. But then it doesn't tell us what his real name is, and that's obviously this quite puzzling thing. Why is he only known by a nickname? And according to church tradition, it's because he's and like that name for obvious reasons. And so this other Judas that we'll look later, he kind of goes by Thaddeus or Lebet. You know, they all go by nickname. So they say he's only known by a nickname, and that kind of makes sense. And according to Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, Thomas, his twin, was a sister called Lycia, and they were both formerly educated in Antioch, where they were from originally. Thomas became an architect, and he probably met Jesus' family because of Joseph's carpentry, kind of in the same trade. And Lycia, his sister, she became a doctor, specialising in infectious diseases. St. John Chrysostom tells us that she died while tending to the sick in the years following Pentecost. She obviously was super important to because he's remembered, when he's remembered as the twin, they're kind of thinking about her. So she was obviously an impressive figure. So she's worth remembering. And then at the dispersion of the apostles, we thought about that in our slot, when they all take lots and find out where they're going to go. He drew the lot for India, but he heard all kinds of scary stories and things. So he said, Lord, send me anywhere, don't send me to India. So he just kind of didn't wait for the Lord to tell him so much. He just kind of went off on his own somewhere else. And he preached in a lot of places, all the way up to the border of China. And there he met Melchior, one of the three wise kings that gave gifts to the baby. And then when Thomas returned to Jerusalem, this man named Haban, he approached Thomas and said he was looking for an architect for the king. And he said that named Jesus of Nazareth appeared to him and sold Thomas to Haban. So he asked Thomas, "Is Jesus your master?" And Thomas replied, "Yes." To India that way. So they went through Arabia, then they met Balthazar, another one of the three wise kings along the way. He crash landed on this island called Socotra, and he built a church from the wreckage. And that island remained, that Arabian island remained 1800. So then Thomas arrived in India. He landed in the kingdom of Caspar, the final of these three wise kings. And asked Thomas to build him a palace. And Thomas agreed, saying, "This is why I've been sent, to do the work of the carpenter." A year later, Caspar found that there weren't even any foundations in place in the he ordered. And so, as it turns out, Thomas had given all the money to the poor. So Caspar sentenced him to. The king's brother Gad died. And he went to heaven and saw a beautiful palace. And the angels explained that Thomas had built that with his good deeds. So Gad came back to life during his funeral. Apparently was quite a... And then he explained to Gad what he saw. So then he asked Caspar, it's like, the angels told me you don't want this palace. You know, but then if you Caspar, he realized what he's done. He's like, this is terrible. So of course he releases Thomas. He's baptized, and then Thomas could go on to South India in 52 AD. That's to arrive in South India. And there he eventually, after many years of ministry, he found a trader who offered to take him. And they stopped at places along the way, like Java and Vietnam. And then they arrived in Beijing in 64 AD.
He preached throughout China, Korea, and Japan. He even made it all the way to the Americas. There are stories of him preaching in Paraguay, Uruguay, and Brazil. There's one story. There's these Amazonian tribes, and they're going to try and kill him. And so he, trusting in Jesus completely, not like when he was a doubter, like in that picture. Now he trusts in Jesus completely, so of course he walks on the water. He just runs across the Amazon to safety, and then he can preach to them another. And they remember that story, and they end up telling it to these Europeans who arrive much later. But they always remember that story. How and Thomas, in the end, he returns to India in 72 AD, and there's this pagan king called Miz, and he's waiting for him. He ends up getting Thomas stabbed there with a glaive. You can see in a weapon, a glaive. They always mention that. That's this particular one. So they stabbed him in his house on this little Mount Thomas, but then he actually only dies of his wounds 3 days later, so he gets to spend his last 3 days preparing the church, and he finally passes away on the 21st of December, and that's his feast day. And then he died surrounded by his church family, and in the end, Misdius also believes because of the tremendous witness he gave, but that is a story for another day. A story, but hope you enjoyed Thomas' story.
Hey, there we are. You get all the 3 wise men. Hey, all 3 of the wise men. We should remember that when we're into all the Christmas stuff. Well, 21st then is when we must recall all the wise men. Okay, so before we get Jude, he's coming. That was a lot, though, there. Let's just quickly have a thought about this, our next study, which is, Jesus really is the living God. What we're really trying to say by this one is just that God dreams. And why we're saying that is what people say is that in ancient times, God didn't reveal himself as he really is because people couldn't handle that. But we can handle God as he really is, but ancient people couldn't do that. So God would kind of reveal himself only a little bit, and then slowly reveal himself a little bit more and a little bit more, as it goes on. Like as if Revelation is like Dance of the Seven Veils or something. God is eventually, he says, this is who I really am. But I know you might say, well, what are you talking about? Okay, let me just explain it. And it's why we want to always say, when God shows up, he doesn't play games. He just says, here I am, as I am. In God, there is no darkness at all. It's just light. So he doesn't hide at all. Either God says, here I am, or he says, you can't see me. So why we say that is sometimes, you remember that thing in Matthew 11, where he says, now people who think they're super clever, he hides himself from them. So he's like, you can't see me at all. Because you think you're so clever and that you can work me out. So he says, right, I'm not going to let you see me at all. But he does show himself just to little children or anyone who's just humble and says, just let me know who you really are. Then he'll say, here I am. Now he's always just done that. He either shows up as he is, or he says, you can't see me because you won't approach me properly. But what he doesn't ever seem to do is go, I'll let you see me a little bit, but it's like not as I really am. I'm going to pretend to be that you a little bit. Now, why that's important is we've thought about how sometimes people have thought of religion as evolving from a kind of animism, and humans used to like worship and rock. Then it's like, then they get a better idea and go, maybe there's lots of gods, but they're not in the rocks, they're in the sky. Lots of gods in the sky. And then someone goes, oh, I've got an upgrade to that. What if there's only one God in the sky? That's a bit better. And then someone eventually later goes, I've got a thought, maybe there's one God, but that God's like 3. Ooh. Oh, that's an even better upgrade. So if you think of religion that way, it's humans, either them, because they're, say, clever, getting better, or some would go, God does that. He reveals himself in ever better ways until eventually says, actually, this here, you can see me as I really am. Now, the reason why we know that isn't true is that would be just playing games. That God does never do, like, as if he's like, I want you to think this way now, but I'm not really that. But I'm doing that for now because I don't think you could handle the real me. See, actually in the Bible, God says, you can't ever handle the real me. It's not as if he says, now human beings can handle the real me, but in the past they couldn't. If anything, it's like in the past, because look at how he shows up in the Bible. He's just like, here I am. And he wrestles with people and eats meals with people and fights with people, or becomes one of us and goes, here I am, full strength. Nothing held back. He always is like that. Here I am, full strength, nothing held back. So the idea that God used to, like as if ancient people used to think like God was like Unitarian or something, like there's just one person, but not three persons. And God wanted that. But then later he's like, well, actually, I don't want you to think like that. See, that would be just playing games. And it's something that at first you might say, I don't get that. Why is this so important? It's important because Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's important that we know God doesn't play games with us. He never does that. He never shows himself unreliable way or an untruthful way or a partial way. Whenever we're dealing with the living God, he is what he is. The living God, Father, Son and Spirit just are there, fully open, nothing hidden, no games, no messing around. The living God is always straightforward, open, honest, nothing hidden, nothing concealed, no games. And the idea that ancient is so insulting. Like, who do we think we are? The living God hates it if we think we're so smart. The only real way of handling God at full strength is to go, I'm not smart. Lord, I feel like I'm just a little baby. And then he's like, oh, you can handle me at full strength. See, that's why we want to make this point. Human religions are very, very complicated and full of levels and upgrades and complexities. God is just like, here I am. And in the end, he sort of strips himself naked and nails himself up and goes, here's me at full strength with nothing hidden. So that's the truth we want to get hold of. When we're looking at Jesus from Genesis to Revelation on every page of the Bible, that is God at full strength. Nothing hidden, no games played, just trust He is always everything that he really is. That's it. Oh, now it's PJ. Here's the other one, Jude. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So, obviously I mentioned that in the last talk. We've got another Judas, but a good Judas. There's more good Judases than bad ones, actually. And this one, he had two nicknames, though. That's how at first he's quite desperate to get away from the name Judas. But if you read his epistle in life, he embraces it. He's like, make it a good thing. So it is, of course, the epistle of Jude. He wins it back. But for a while, he goes by these two nicknames, Thaddeus and Lebbaeus. So St. Jerome calls him Trionius, disciple. So he gets another one. He gets a fourth nickname. And it's quite important, though, because you think about nicknames, how they're earned, and, you know, Sons of Thunder, and when you think about John's Gospel and how heavenly it is, and Revelation, and he's thinking about God in this way, and God speaks like thunder, so to be called that, like, oh, It's an awesome nickname to have. Like, he really understands God in this way. But then Jude, he gets 2 nicknames. And in fact, he might be nicknamed the Just as well, because some of his brothers are as well. So it seems like he might be. Anyway, and these nicknames. Thaddeus means courageous or like strong-hearted, which, kind of goes without saying, and we'll see how he is that. And his other one, Labaeus, means like tender-hearted. So he's like a heart apostle. And so you can see in the Gospels his tender heart. It makes him ask supple, and Jesus like, I'm sharing myself with you in a special way. And Jude instantly says, but why to us and not to the whole world? Like, he's so eager. And that's his tender heart. That's his Labaeus nickname showing. And according to Book 2 of the Apostolic Constitutions, this very ancient book, become a carpenter like his father. He instead worked as a pastoral farmer, like the least, his ancestors Abraham and so on. And so he kept doing that in his time as an apostle. It mentions, which is really fun, I think. And Jude lived to see his grandchildren, and may have even seen his great-grandchildren. So he's like patriarch guy, like really an Old Testament kind of character, like really Genesis sort of person. He's brilliant for that, and to look way, Jude thinks very highly of shepherds. See, that's another thing I can take away from him, his character. But then there is like a kind of a dark side to him, because Saint Dimitri tells a story where, as Saint Joseph, Jude's father, as he's dying, he's like, I've got to make sure Jesus some of my inheritance. And then Jude's like, no, he's not really your son. He can't get any. So then James, the brother of God, he gives up his inheritance and gives it to Jesus. And that's why he calls him the brother of God. They're like, oh, he deserved it, he earned it. And you'll notice in his apostle, Jude's like, oh, I'm just Christ. I'm James's brother and I'm just a slave of Christ. He doesn't dare call himself a brother of Christ. But we call him it because we know he does earn it later in life. But he was always ashamed that he thought that. He never got over it, at least in this life. I'm sure Jesus has told him, now that he's in heaven. So then where did Jude go? So at first he goes to Syria and Lebanon. He's especially mentioned preaching in Beirut, Palmyra and Mosul. And Abdias, one of the lesser apostles, he tells us about the miracles Jude did. You can read those stories. And Armenian hagiographies say that he preached throughout the Armenian Empire from 35 to 43 AD. Shortly after Abgar was recognized, we've mentioned him many times, he's this incredible first century king. He encouraged his nephew Sanitruc. Now you probably do before, he's a baddie, but he encouraged Sanitruc to let Jude in to the empire. So then Jude met Sanitruc's niece, I think. Santuct, she's this princess basically, and confessed the faith, and she becomes an incredible preacher, and he finds another guy called Eliseus, and then he sends him to preach over in what's now Azerbaijan. And then when he was joined by his brother Simon, because when Dad was telling us about Simon's life, we remember he's this adopted brother, but they are so close. He's like, they're totally brothers, Simon and Jude. And they defeated these wizards, Zaroes and Arphaxad, and they expelled them from the Persian Empire. So then that emperor, so he's won the trust of 2 emperors now. That emperor lets him preach all throughout his empire, and then he goes to the border of China along the Silk Road, and that's his epistle, because he wants to reach as many people as possible for sending this letter. And it's incredible, you can see his tender heart in his epistle, because he talks about praying for heretics, as these heretics, leading people astray, and he's like, do try and save them, even if it's just from the fire, please. God can make them faultless to stand. Even these heretics, he's like, no, but you've got to try and save them. Which is just incredible that he's like that. And he was able to join Thomas in China, and they reached the ends of the earth together. But then he returned to Armenia. Sanitruc, he writes this letter. He's like, oh, it'd be great if you come back to Armenia. And of course, this is a trap, and he imprisons Jude with Simon, Bartholomew, and that princess. And then in the city called Karakalise, Jude was hit by a mace in the head, and then he's beheaded with a scimitar. And then Santuct, she was wavering in the faith for a bit, but she sees his incredible faith, and then she doesn't renounce and she also is martyred. And she had one last request, to be buried next to him. And that's where both of them are, in, I think, what's now Persia or Iran area. So that's that life.
Hey! Great, well done.
Right. So, let's now have a look at our Bible study in Exodus. And we're going through just this Exodus study guide. And again, this is just this theme, which let's keep that in mind. That rock was Christ. That really is this underlying message of, well, overlying actually, later in the book. But yeah, it's an amazing theme which we'll be looking at. So, Exodus chapter 4. So, just to summarise kind of last week in chapter 3, we had Moses who meets and talks with the Father through the Son in the power of the Spirit. That's chapter 3. An incredible expression of who God is in full to Moses. And that's to help it commission him to be this saviour-like figure, a Christ-like figure who's going to help rescue this church in Egypt. So that's chapter 3, and we had a look at that, this incredible expression of who God is. Now, chapter 4, let's have a look at that. There's some more stuff on the angel of the Lord I wanted to cover, but I will have a look just later, maybe after chapter 4. But let's just get started in chapter 4. So now what the Lord's doing is he's commissioned Moses, and he's now giving him these signs, these encouragements, these proofs that Moses met God. That it does actually say, what if they say the Lord did not appear to you? So all of these are proof that God met Moses face to face as a friend, which is going to happen all throughout Exodus. So let's have a look at signs in chapter 4. So let's just start. Chapter 4, verse 1. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared." So, firstly, this. Now, perhaps if I can just cheat a little bit, if we just move on to verse 20 just briefly, we'll see this staff is mentioned again, and it says Moses took his wife and sons and went to Egypt, and he took the staff of God in his hand. So this staff, all throughout Exodus, just keeps getting more amazing. And it becomes really in Numbers, it even itself looks like Christ. It becomes a sign of this life, this infinite life of God. So this staff becomes amazing, this staff of God. And all throughout Exodus, this staff is kind of directs God on what to do. All these Moses holds this staff, the Lord obeys. Now, there's something kind of amazing about this. Now, what probably the most incredible thing about this staff is verse 2. The Lord said to Moses, "What is that in your hand?" That really is the best part of this. This staff becomes like an internationally known object of power. And it began because the Lord goes, what are you holding? All right, okay, let's use that. Let's use that shepherd's crook. Let's use that stick that you're using, your walking stick. Right, with that, I'm going to destroy Egypt. I'm going to destroy the Lord is basically going to wage war on gods and giants later. He wages war on the biggest enemies around with a stick that was found in Moses' hand. Now, of course, the best part of that is the Lord can use anything. Now, this is so important for Moses, because we'll see later in this chapter, Moses is quite insecure. He's feeling afraid. He's feeling like he's not up to the task. And really what the Lord's saying is, look, if I can make a stick destroy gods and giants, if that's going to rescue, of course you can. If you're with me, anything's possible. With just a stick, I'm going to rescue you from this really centuries of enslavement. So that's what this staff becomes, an incredible symbol. Now, just talk a little bit about some of the importance of the staff. Now, one of the things that this staff has is this power to control snakes. Now, one of the reasons that's important is, in Genesis, this was attributed to Jesus. Jesus was going to have power over snakes. Now, that's something we'll just look at, and I don't think I can quite mention it now because it's a whole other title of Jesus, but I might just cover it if I can. This idea of a staff actually in the Bible becomes this kind of title of Jesus. And in particular in Zechariah, it's this, like the branch, like stick. Now, all throughout the Bible, there's this idea that a staff is what you rest on. It's where you get your strength and support. What are you being supported by? What's helping you? What are you leaning on for strength? Now that, as we just say, of course, that's a walking stick. That's a staff, yeah. But in the Bible, that becomes something so big. And it becomes this really big theological question. What are you spiritually resting on? What are you spiritually finding support and strength in? Now, as an example, if you don't quite, there's a bit later where the church starts to go back to Egypt. They start to sell themselves back to Egypt later. And the Lord says, why are you doing that? They are like a staff of reed. Lean on it, splinters. So do we see that? This staff, the idea of staffs, become what you finding support and strength in. Now in the Bible, Jesus is this branch. He is the only one who can truly give strength and support when you need it. Now of course, that's this message to Moses in Exodus 4. He's insecure. He doesn't feel up to the task. And remember, he's talking with Jesus. And Jesus goes, yeah, I know everything. Of course I can help you. If you trust in me, anything's possible. Jesus is this kind of idea in the Bible of a staff. And that's, I know I've covered probably too long. That's why this staff becomes a bit like a symbol of Jesus later. In Numbers, you've got this incredible event where it looks like a dead bit of wood and it's lined up with other ones. But then this one flowers and produces fruit. Now, if you remember from Psalm 1, that's a big aspect of Jesus, that he is like this tree, this branch, which produces life, produces fruit. So anyway, this staff, I'm just trying to say, it is an amazing thing, an amazing object which actually represents, but it all begins with God saying, what's in your hand? What are you holding? We'll use that. Final thing. Remember, Moses is a shepherd's crook. I just wanted to mention that because, as we know, bishops have a shepherd's crook as a sign of their place, their authority. And it's kind of to do with this. These leaders of the church are shepherds. We are like shepherds looking after a flock because Jesus is the shepherd. So anyway, there's tons about this staff. There's more to talk about, but we will carry on. So, the staff, an incredible symbol of Jesus and his control over the snake. Let's carry on. So, verse 6. Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak. When he took it out, the skin was leprous, had become as white as snow. Now, put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Right. So, this aspect of leprosy is a big thing in the Bible. And really, what this is just representing is death. Leprosy, and really a lot of these diseases, are meant to show us and tell us we are dying. Since Genesis, since we rejected the source of life, we're not getting better, we're not living, dying. That's this aspect in the Bible. Now, why is that important? Now, here's the first thing. So notice first where Moses puts his hand. It's over his heart. Why is that? Because the Lord, all throughout the Bible, is trying to tell us your heart is what needs to change. You need a new heart. Or really, as we looked at weeks ago, your heart is like the most fundamental part of you. It gives you life. It covers your whole body. It's really all of you. Your core, your central part is your heart. And so the Lord's really saying, you need to be made completely new. You need to be renewed. Your heart, the center of you, needs to be healed. And that's really in the Bible where Moses' hand goes through. It's really quick, but he goes through kind of representation of the gospel. In a very short moment, the entire Bible's good news is presented in just one motion. Moses puts his hand over his heart, and it's like it's dead. Really, that's saying our heart, we at our core are dead. We talked in Ephesians how it says we were dead in our transgressions. That's what we're like. Our heart, the center of us, is dead. Now, what's incredible is not that Moses' hand became leprous. We all know dying. That idea of a disease is that's not like fundamental or groundbreaking. What's incredible is that when Moses put his hand back, it's restored. That's this incredible miracle, really. We all know we're dying. What's incredible is the Lord can make us new, restore us, give us a new heart. So just quickly, he's got a little gospel message. Your heart needs to be remade. Let Moses show everyone. You're dying, but the Lord can give you life. Okay, so just briefly, there was a lot. Just quickly, there's a story in Naaman on leprosy. I know, I love the story. Naaman is this pagan general. He's covered in leprosy, covered in death, but it's when he's baptized that he gets cleaned. It's like, he even says, to Elisha, who heals him, he goes, "Oh, I thought you'd just wave your hands or say some magic words or give some medicine or something." It's like, "But you just told me to wash, and that cleaned me. Get baptized." Anyway, so that story is talking about we are spiritually dead, and we need a spiritual rebirth, a spiritual restoration. Right. Oh man, this. We'll carry on to the third sign. So leprosy is a restoration of our heart. We are being made into new living beings. Now, I wanted to cover a bit on that because when we do this third sign, water to blood. So the Lord says, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. Right. So, okay. I want to quickly explain this a lot in this, and perhaps the best way is, if you want a hint on this, Leviticus chapter 14, verse 1 to 7 is really, that explains what's going on actually with all three signs that Moses is being given. Right. In Leviticus, there is someone who has leprosy. And the Lord says, when they have leprosy, do this. Take a bird and kill it over some fresh water, and that water will turn to blood. Then, with another bird like it, you've got to dip it in the blood and pour it over someone. Now, when you do that, they will be made clean. And then you set that bird free. Now, why is that important? Why this really quite graphic or violent image? It's for this reason. Leprosy represents death. Now, the price of death, we have to face. But we can have something else die for us. Or rather, someone else. That is this big message all throughout Exodus. We'll see it in the Passover, this biggest of the sacrifices. Is you are going to die. You are dying. But you can be restored if something else dies for you. That's this message which is going all through. So the water to blood, just kind of briefly, it's talking about, obviously, death. You are facing death. What are you going to do about your death? That's the big message. Now, why is this water to blood so important? It's because I wanted to bring up a gospel story. So you obviously water into wine. We have to mention it because there is literally a moment where this happens later. Water to blood in Exodus, then water to wine in the Gospels. What's the difference? Why? Why that small change? And it's for this reason. We all have to face death, but if Jesus dies for us, if we let something else die for us, take that disease away, then that water, that blood is sweet to us. It cleans us. It's good for us. His death is good for us. Our death doesn't do anything. Notice, we'll actually look at it later. When the Nile, so the Lord here just says you can pour a bit of water, and then at the time Moses is zealous and just says all of it is going to be turned to blood. So we'll look later. And obviously that doesn't achieve, for the Egyptians that's just bad. The water to blood, it doesn't help. But in the Gospels, this water to wine, when Jesus is present, everyone loves it. Everyone's having a great time. It's a party. The same thing that's going on. Somebody's dying. But for us, it's good if it's Jesus instead of us. Now, this is such an important message. Right, I might just, because of it, skip on to the end, the last of this chapter. Why are those three signs so important? The eternal life of Jesus, the branch, restoring our dead state by his death. That's what these three signs are showing. Now, we mentioned a few weeks ago that we've got this circumcision that happens at the end of 4. So if we just read, let's read from 24 onward. Just to summarise, Moses has met the Lord. He's finally been convinced to go do his job. But there is something actually I really want to mention about that, so I really want to mention it. Verse 24, he's now leaving to go back to Egypt. So verse 24. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Just a note there, it isn't necessarily feet. They even have a footnote here. The word is actually, but they've written it as Moses. Now, we'll talk about that quickly. So she does this circumcision, touches his feet, and says, surely you are bridegroom of blood to me. And she's referring to this circumcision. Why is it important, this little event? We've just talked about how to be restored, we have to accept Jesus' death. So, briefly as I can, circumcision, we know, is a sign of us getting rid of our dead bodies, our useless bodies. It's a sign of saying, I'm going to cut off my dead body and I'm going to give that to Jesus. I'm going to give that to the Lord. My death, I give to him, and he'll give me his life. That's the same with baptism. We are dying and then rising again in Jesus. That's this sign. So anyway, what's happening with this circumcision? What if it's this? Zipporah knows that they're going to face death. What's important is are we going to give that death, that mess, that blood, are we going to give that to Jesus? Because in the Gospels, something like this happens. All the sick, all the blind and lame and deaf and helpless or demon-possessed, whatever it is, they come to Jesus' feet. And when they do that, they're restored. When they give him their mess, their blood, they get healed, full of life. So just to perhaps, all of chapter 4 is really a huge, huge message which is going to recur all throughout Exodus. We are dying. We need Jesus' life. So let's give him all our mess. Let him die for us. Let him take that blood. That foreskin really is just our old bodies. Let him take our old bodies. We'll get a new one. That, in essence. Okay, next week, there's one last thing in chapter 4 I want to cover, and it's to do with Moses and Aaron. But I will stop there. Next week, let's cover Moses and Aaron. Okay.
Hey, well, we'll just close it off, and just that thought before we pray is that idea that Jesus can say to us, what is in your hand? And whatever you've got, he's like, that's enough. And I always think of that little boy who's just got the packed lunch, isn't it? What have you got? Packed lunch. Sure. And the disciples are like, well, that's never going to help everybody. Jesus is like, just give it here. Let's see what I can do with a packed lunch. And he's like, what have you got in your hand? You might say, well, I've got a lot more in my possession than just a stick or a single packed lunch. Oh, if he could do all those things with a stick or a packed lunch, and you're like, I've got loads of stuff. Oh my goodness, he could take over the universe. But the point is, whatever we've got, it's enough. And I'm taking that message. And the other thing is leprosy, isn't it? The thing that leprosy does, it takes away your feeling. Can't feel anything, can't feel danger, and that's the real danger of leprosy. You don't know that you're in danger and you get burned and all sorts of things. That is the real danger with our spiritual leprosy. We just don't feel anything anymore as we should. Our emotions don't function. And we don't know when we're in danger and we're getting burned. Well, all these are things, but the point is, we bring all